The federal agents drove away with Marcus's rifle in a sealed evidence bag, their victory complete. But as their taillights disappeared into the Texas dust, something else emerged from the brush, something with tusks, rage, and a hunger for revenge that no law could contain. What Marcus couldn't protect with bullets, nature would reclaim with blood. And when the government officials returned to finish what they started, they'd discover that some guardians don't need licenses to kill. Marcus Whitmore's weathered hands gripped the porch railing as the black SUVs carved dust clouds down his gravel drive. 3 vehicles. Federal plates. His chest tightened, not from fear, but from the bitter taste of inevitability that had been building in his throat for months. The lead vehicle stopped 20 yards from his front steps, close enough to intimidate but far enough to retreat if needed. Standard federal playbook. Marcus had seen it before, back when he wore the uniform. Himself. Agent Sarah Chen stepped out first, her pressed suit a stark contrast to the wild Texas landscape that stretched endlessly behind her. She was young, maybe 30, with the kind of rigid posture that screamed city training and zero field experience. Behind her emerged Agent Rodriguez, older, scarred, his hand resting casually near his sidearm. Mr. Whitmore. Chen's voice carried the hollow authority of someone reading from a script. I'm Agent Chen, ATF. This is Agent Rodriguez. We have a federal warrant for the seizure of firearms on these premises. Marcus didn't move from the porch. At 63, his body carried the accumulated weight of 3 tours in Vietnam, 2 decades as a sheriff's deputy, and 15 years of fighting the federal government's incremental stranglehold on his family's land. His rifle, his grandfather's, Winchester 1894, leaned against the porch post beside him. Warrants for what, exactly? Chen held up a manila folder thick with official seals. Illegal modification of a firearm. Possession of an unregistered weapon. Violation of the National Firearms Act. That rifle belonged to my grandfather. Been in my family since 1923. According to our investigation, you modified the trigger, mechanism and barrel length without proper federal documentation. Chen's rehearsed words carried no emotion, no acknowledgement that she was dismantling a man's heritage with bureaucratic precision. Rodriguez stepped forward, his experience reading the situation differently than his partner. Marcus, can I call you Marcus? We've got paperwork saying otherwise. Photos, witness statements. This doesn't have to be difficult. Marcus finally stepped down from the porch, his boots hitting the packed earth with the weight of finality. Witness statements? From who? That's classified. Kevin Paulson. Marcus's voice cut through the morning heat like a blade. Neighbor's been feuding with my family for 30 years over water rights. Now here's your star witness. Chen's mask slipped for just a moment, a flicker of uncertainty that confirmed what Marcus already knew. This wasn't about firearms violations. This was about land. His land. The 2,400 acres that held the largest natural aquifer in 3 counties, sitting right in the path of the proposed federal conservation corridor. Sir, I'm going to need you to step away from the weapon and place your hands behind your back. For what? Obstruction. Failure to comply with a federal investigation. Marcus looked past them toward the tree line where the old ranch rode, disappeared into scrub oak and mesquite. Somewhere out there, in the thick brush that had protected his family for 4 generations, something moved. Not cattle. He'd sold the last of his herd 6 months ago when the legal fees started mounting. Something else. Something with more teeth. That rifle's not modified, Marcus said quietly. It's exactly like my grandfather carried it in France during World War I, and exactly like my father carried it in Korea, and exactly like I carried it in Vietnam. 3 wars, Agent Chen. That weapon's got more honor in its stock than most men carry in their whole lives. Sir, please step away. You want to know what's modified. Marcus's voice rose, carrying across the empty pasture where his father once ran 500 head of cattle. This land. Modified by lawyers and bureaucrats and federal agents who never worked a day with their hands, never watched their children grow up knowing every tree and creek and limestone outcrop like it was part of their own body. Rodriguez drew his weapon. Hands where I can see them. Now. Marcus raised his hand slowly, but his eyes stayed fixed on the tree line. Movement. Definitely movement. Big, dark shapes filtering between the oak trees like shadows given substance. Chen approached the Winchester, handling it like evidence rather than heritage. She bagged it with clinical efficiency while Rodriguez kept his sidearm trained on Marcus's chest. Anything else we should know about? Chen asked. Other weapons? Ammunition storage? Marcus almost smiled. Agent, you're about to find out there's lots of things on this ranch you don't know about. The handcuffs clicked around his wrists with the cold finality of government steel. As they loaded him into the back of the lead SUV, Marcus caught Rodriguez's eye in the rearview mirror. You ever hunt wild boar, Agent? Rodriguez frowned. What? Big ones run about 400 pounds. Tusks like railroad spikes. Smart, too. Smarter than people give them credit for. They remember who hurts them. What's your point? Marcus settled back into the government upholstery, watching his ranch disappear through tinted windows. No point. Just making conversation. But as the convoy of federal vehicles wound down the gravel drive toward the main road, Marcus saw what the agents had missed. Dark shapes emerging from the brush line, moving with purpose toward the now empty ranch house. Wild boar, more than he'd ever seen at once. A whole sounder, maybe 30 animals, led by a massive male with scarred hide and tusks that caught the morning sunlight like bone daggers. The big male stopped at the edge of the yard, testing the air. His small, intelligent eyes tracked the dust cloud of the retreating federal vehicles with what looked almost like calculation. Then he turned toward the house, Marcus's house, and grunted once. A sound of possession, of claiming. The other boar spread out across the property with military precision, taking positions that controlled every approach route. The big male trotted up onto Marcus's front porch, his hooves echoing where Marcus's boots had stood just minutes before. Through the SUV's rear window, Marcus watched nature reclaim what the law had seized. And for the first time in months, he smiled. Agent Chen would be back, probably with more vehicles, more agents, more paperwork designed to strip away everything Marcus's family had built. But when she returned, she'd discover that some territory doesn't transfer with federal warrants. The Brazos County Detention Center smelled like disinfectant and broken dreams. Marcus sat on the concrete bench in his cell, staring at the water stain on the opposite wall that looked like his grandfather's profile. 48 hours of processed meals and fluorescent lighting, 48 hours of his lawyer's increasingly desperate phone calls, 48 hours of imagining what was happening back at the ranch. His court-appointed attorney, Jennifer Walsh, was young enough to still believe the system worked. She'd spend the morning explaining plea bargains and federal sentencing guidelines while Marcus watched dust motes dance in the jail's artificial light. The ATF is offering 18 months if you plead guilty to the firearms charges, she said, her voice echoing off the concrete walls. With good behavior, you could be out in 14. And my land. That's separate. The environmental impact study is still pending. If the aquifer designation goes through, they get everything. Marcus's voice was flat as hammered steel. 4,700 acres that my great-grandfather bought with money he earned digging wells. Gone. Jennifer shuffled her papers, avoiding his eyes. Marcus, I have to be honest with you. The witness testimony is compelling. Kevin Paulson has photographs of you with a rifle, detailed statements about modifications. Kevin Paulson's been trying to steal my water rights since his daddy died. Now he's got the federal government doing his dirty work. Through the narrow window, Marcus could see storm clouds building over the distant hills where his ranch waited. Rain was coming. Good. The land needed it, and the boar would be active. The guard's keys jangled in the hallway. Whitmore, you're out. Jennifer looked confused. The bail hearing isn't until charges dropped. The guard's voice carried the weary indifference of a man who'd seen federal cases evaporate before. Someone downtown made a call. Marcus stood slowly, his joints protesting 2 days of government hospitality. Dropped. Your ride's waiting. In the processing room, they returned his personal effects in a manila envelope. Wallet, keys, his grandfather's pocket watch, everything except what mattered most. As he signed the release forms, Marcus caught sight of the television in their corner. Local news. A reporter standing in front of yellow crime scene tape. Third incident this week involving aggressive wildlife in Brazos County. Fish and wildlife officials are advising residents to avoid rural areas until the guard switched channels to a talk show. But Marcus had seen enough. The reporter had been standing on a road he recognized. The road that led to the Paulson Ranch. Outside, Jennifer waited by her Honda, looking like she'd rather be anywhere else. Marcus, I don't understand. The ATF doesn't just drop cases like this. Someone with serious pull made a phone call. Maybe they realized they had the wrong man. Or maybe something bigger is happening. She handed him a manila folder. These came with the release papers. Incident reports from the sheriff's department. Marcus opened the folder as they drove through downtown Brazos. 3 reports, all filed within the last 2 days. Aggressive wildlife encounters. Property damage. 1 injury requiring medical attention. The first report made his chest tight. Kevin Paulson, age 54, treated at Brazos General for severe lacerations to his lower legs. Claims he was attacked by a wild boar while checking fence lines on his property. Animal described as unusually large and aggressive. Victim states the animal seemed to be defending territory despite being on Paulson property. The second report was from Paulson's eastern neighbor, retired banker Bill Crawford. Extensive damage to garden and landscaping. Multiple large animals, possibly feral hogs, destroyed approximately $15,000 worth of ornamental plants and irrigation. Equipment. Animals appeared to be moving in organized groups. The third report chilled Marcus's blood. Federal agents Chen and Rodriguez, ATF, requesting local law enforcement assistance in accessing rural properties for follow-up investigation. Agents report their government vehicle was surrounded by aggressive wildlife during attempt to serve additional warrants. No injuries, but agents unable to complete assigned duties. Jennifer pulled into the parking lot of Murphy's Diner on the edge of town. Marcus, what the hell is going on out there? Marcus closed the folder and stared through the windshield at the darkening sky. Lightning flickered in the distance, illuminating the storm clouds that were building over his ranch. Nature's got a way of balancing the books. That's not an answer. He opened the car door, feeling the first drops of rain on his face. You did good work, Jennifer. Send me your bill. How are you getting home? Marcus pulled out his cell phone and dialed a number he'd memorized 40 years ago. It rang twice before a gravelly voice answered. Ray's towing. Ray, it's Marcus Whitmore. I need a ride. Jesus, Marcus, where you been? Whole county's talking about what's happening out your way. Sheriff's got deputies scared to patrol the back roads. Fish and Wildlife's talking about bringing in helicopter crews. I'll explain when you get here. Murphy's Diner. Ray's tow truck arrived 20 minutes later, splattered with mud and bearing fresh scratches along the passenger side. Ray Donovan was Marcus's age, built like a barrel with hands that could tear phone books in half. He'd been pulling vehicles out of ditches and arroyos for 30 years, but his eyes carried something Marcus had never seen before, genuine unease. You sure you want to go back out there? Ray asked as they drove north on Farm Road 158. I'm telling you, Marcus, something ain't right. Yesterday, I got called to pull a ATF vehicle out of a creek bed near your place. Agents were spooked worse than teenagers at a ghost story. Through the truck's rain-streaked windshield, Marcus watched the familiar landscape roll past. His neighbors' properties looked different. Trampled fence lines, damaged gates, yards torn up like war zones. But as they approached the turnoff to his ranch, the destruction stopped. His road, his fence line, his gate, all untouched. Ray, you can drop me at the gate. Like hell. I'm driving you to your front door. But as they turned onto Marcus's gravel drive, Ray's truck slowed to a crawl. In the headlights, dark shapes moved between the oak trees. Not fleeing from the approaching vehicle, but positioning themselves. Watching. Jesus Christ, Ray whispered. The largest boar Marcus had ever seen stepped into the road 50 yards ahead of them. 400 pounds easy, maybe more, with tusks that gleamed white in the headlight glare. Scars crisscrossed his hide like a road map of old battles. He stood motionless in the center of the drive, steam rising from his massive shoulders in. The cold rain. Other shapes emerged from the brush on both sides of the road. Dozens of them. A sounder large enough to devastate a cornfield, organized enough to control territory. Back up, Marcus said quietly. What? Back up, Ray. Now. Ray threw the truck in reverse, but the big male didn't move. He watched them retreat with intelligent, calculating eyes. When they reached the main road, He turned and trotted back into the brush, followed by his army. Ray's hand shook on the steering wheel. "Marcus, what in God's name have you done?" Marcus opened the truck door and stepped out into the rain. Lightning split the sky, illuminating his ranch house in the distance. On the front porch, barely visible through the downpour, the massive boar stood like a sentry. "I didn't do anything, Ray. I just stopped doing something." "What's that supposed to mean?" Marcus started walking toward his gate. "Means for 40 years, I kept them fed and peaceful. Grain feeders, salt licks, managed hunting to keep the population controlled. I was the balance between wild and civilized. And now..." Marcus turned back toward his friend, rain streaming down his face. "Now they're not my livestock anymore, Ray. They're my partners." The gate stood open, not damaged, but deliberately opened. As Marcus walked through, he heard Ray's truck retreating down the main road, engine whining in first gear. Behind him, in the darkness between lightning strikes, he heard something else, the sound of hooves on gravel, keeping pace but staying hidden, escorting him home. When he reached his front porch, the big male was waiting. Up close, Marcus could see the intelligence in those dark eyes, the calculated patience of a predator who understood strategy. The boar's massive head turned toward the main road where Agent Chen would eventually return with more vehicles, more warrants, more federal authority. Then the animal looked back at Marcus and grunted once, a sound that somehow conveyed both recognition and partnership. Marcus climbed the steps to his front door, fishing for his keys. "Welcome to the family business," he said quietly. The boar settled onto the porch like a guard dog made of muscle and bone and primal rage. In the distance, thunder rolled across the Texas Hill Country, and Marcus knew that when morning came, the rules of engagement would be forever changed. Agent Sarah Chen stared at the satellite images spread across the conference table in the ATF field office, her jaw tight with frustration. 48 hours since they dropped the charges against Marcus Whitmore, and the situation had escalated beyond anything in her training manual. "Tell me again why we released him," she said, not looking up from the aerial photographs that showed impossible congregations of wildlife around the Whitmore property. Deputy Director James Morrison adjusted his tie, a nervous habit that betrayed his discomfort with field operations. At 55, Morrison was a career bureaucrat who preferred his conflicts to come with paper trails and committee hearings. Orders from Washington. The environmental assessment takes priority over individual firearms violations. Environmental assessment. Rodriguez leaned back in his chair, fatigue etched into his weathered face. "Jim, we've got reports of organized animal attacks on 3 neighboring properties. Yesterday, a mail carrier needed 12 stitches after something with tusks went after his truck. This isn't environmental, it's warfare." Chen's laptop chimed with an incoming video call. The screen filled with the sharp features of Deputy Assistant Director Helen Martinez, calling from Washington. Behind her, Chen could see the sterile corridors of the J. Edgar Hoover building. "Agent Chen, I'm looking at your incident reports. Can you explain to me how a simple firearm seizure has resulted in federal agents being chased off private property by wild animals?" The situation is unprecedented. The subject appears to have some kind of relationship with local wildlife that we didn't anticipate. Relationship. Martinez's voice carried the edge of someone whose patience was wearing thin. "Agent, I need facts, not nature documentary speculation." Morrison cleared his throat. "Deputy Director, we believe Marcus Whitmore has been feeding and potentially training feral hogs on his property for years. When we arrested him, it disrupted whatever control mechanism he was using." Chen pulled up a new satellite image on her laptop, this one taken just 6 hours earlier. This is current imagery of the Whitmore Ranch. If you look at these dark clusters, those are congregations of large animals. Our wildlife consultant estimates between 60 and 80 individual boar, moving in coordinated groups." Martinez leaned closer to her camera. "Coordinated how?" "They are patrolling, establishing perimeters. Yesterday, when Agent Rodriguez and I attempted to serve follow-up warrants on neighboring properties, we encountered what can only be described as organized resistance." Rodriguez pulled out his phone and showed a video he'd recorded from inside their government SUV. Shaky footage of massive shapes surrounding their vehicle, testing the doors, one particularly large boar actually standing on its hind legs too. peer through the windshield. They weren't randomly aggressive, Rodriguez said. They were tactical, surrounding us, cutting off escape routes, communicating with grunts and snorts that sounded almost like signals. Martinez was quiet for a long moment. What's the status of the land acquisition? Morrison consulted his tablet. The environmental impact study supports federal acquisition of the aquifer region. We are prepared to move forward with eminent domain proceedings, but the wildlife situation is complicating physical access to the property for assessment teams. And the locals? Chen pulled up another file. Kevin Paulson, our primary witness against Whitmore, has recanted his testimony, claims he was coerced by federal agents and that his previous statements were false. That's impossible. I've seen the photographs. Yes'm, but yesterday Mr. Paulson was found in his living room by paramedics, unconscious from blood loss. Large animal tracks led from his back door to his bedroom window. The attending physician said it looked like something had been systematically terrorizing him for hours. Rodriguez leaned forward. Helen, whatever Whitmore's done, these animals are protecting his property like they own it. And they're smart enough to target our allies while leaving neutral parties alone. Martinez's expression hardened. Are you telling me that a 63-year-old rancher has weaponized wild pigs against the federal government? Chen said carefully. I'm telling you that we need a different approach. Traditional law enforcement tactics aren't effective when your suspects have forelegs and tusks. What do you recommend? Morrison straightened his tie again. Wildlife Services has teams that specialize in problem animal removal. Helicopter crews, sharpshooters, containment specialists. We could clear the entire area in 48 hours. Body count. Estimated 60 to 80 animals. All feral, all aggressive, all posing a threat to public safety. Martinez nodded slowly. Do it. I want that property cleared and Whitmore back in custody within 72 hours. Whatever arrangement he has with these animals ends now. Chen felt something cold settle in her stomach. With respect, shouldn't we attempt communication with the subject first? If he really does have control over these animals, Agent Chen, Marcus Whitmore is not Dr. Doolittle. He's a domestic terrorist who's using dangerous wildlife to obstruct federal law enforcement. The solution is surgical removal of the threat, not negotiation. The video call ended, leaving the three agents staring at satellite images of a ranch. That had become something unprecedented in federal law enforcement, territory they couldn't access. Rodriguez's phone buzzed with a text message. He read it and laughed, a sound with no humor in it. What? Chen asked. Ray Donovan, local tow truck operator, says the sheriff's department is officially suspending all patrol activities on rural roads in Sector 7. That's everything within 5 miles of the Whitmore Ranch. Morrison frowned. On whose authority? Sheriff Rebecca Hayes. Apparently, 3 of her deputies have refused direct orders to conduct wellness checks on neighboring properties. Unions backing them, citing unsafe working conditions. Chen stood up and walked to the window overlooking downtown Brazos. Storm clouds were building again, the same pattern she'd watched from the detention center 2 days ago. Jim, what if we are wrong about this? Wrong how? What if Whitmore isn't controlling these animals? What if he's just not fighting them anymore? Rodriguez understood first. You mean what if he's not their trainer, he's their ally? Think about it. 40 years of managing wildlife on his property, maintaining balance, keeping them fed and peaceful. Then we show up, arrest him, seize his rifle, threaten everything he's spent his life protecting. What if they're just returning the favor? Morrison shook his head. Animals don't think that way. They don't understand concepts, like loyalty or revenge. Chen's phone rang. Local number, unfamiliar. She answered on speaker. Agent Chen, this is Dr. Sarah Castellanos, veterinary pathologist at Texas A&M. I understand you're dealing with some unusual wildlife behavior in Brazos County. Dr. Castellanos, how did you get this number? Sheriff Hayes gave it to me. I've been analyzing tissue samples from livestock killed in the area over the past week. Agent, these aren't random predation events. The bite patterns, the surgical precision of the attacks, the selection of targets, this represents learned behavior at a level I've never seen in feral swine. Chen felt the cold in her stomach spread to her chest. What kind of learned behavior? The kind that suggests these animals are making calculated decisions about who to attack and who to leave alone. The kind that suggests they're receiving information about target selection from an outside source. Or an inside source, Rodriguez said quietly. Morrison was already reaching for his phone. I'm calling Washington back. We need the Wildlife Services team here today, not tomorrow. But as Chen watched the storm clouds building over the distant hills where Marcus Whitmore's ranch waited, she wondered if federal helicopters and sharpshooters were really prepared for what they would find. In her experience, the most dangerous enemies were the ones who made you come to them. And something told her that Marcus Whitmore had been preparing for this fight a lot longer than the federal government had been planning their assault. The helicopters came at dawn, their rotors cutting through the morning mist like mechanical vultures. Marcus stood on his front porch, coffee mug in hand, watching 3 Bell 206 approach from the southeast. Professional-grade aircraft, not the local sheriff's ancient patrol bird. Federal money. Federal resolve. Beside him, the massive boar he'd started calling General, though he'd never admit to naming a wild animal, lifted his scarred head toward the sky. The old male's ears tracked the approaching sound with the focused attention of something that understood threat assessment. They're coming hard this time, Marcus said quietly. The boar grunted once, a sound that carried across the ranch yard. Like a command. From the oak line, answering calls echoed back. Not the random snorts and squeals of feeding pigs, but organized communication. Tactical coordination. Marcus's phone buzzed. Text message from Sheriff Rebecca Hayes. Marcus, get inside. Federal Wildlife Team inbound with shoot-on-site authorization. This is not a drill. He typed back, tell them I'm willing to talk. The response came immediately, they're not coming to talk. The first helicopter swept low over his pasture, close enough that Marcus could see the tactical gear of the men hanging out its open doors. Wildlife Services uniforms, but military equipment. Night vision scopes. High-powered rifles. Radio headsets that crackled with coordinated chatter. General rose to his feet, 400 pounds of muscle and bone and accumulated rage. His tusks caught the morning light as he tested the air, reading information that human senses couldn't process. Then he looked at Marcus with eyes that held 40 years of shared understanding. I know, Marcus said. They're not here for me. The second helicopter took position over the eastern pasture while the third circled toward the back 40. Classic containment pattern. Drive the target animals toward a killing field, establish crossfire zones, eliminate resistance with overwhelming force. But as the aircraft settled into their attack positions, something unexpected happened. The forest went silent. Not the gradual quiet of animals fleeing. The instant, complete silence of prey that had vanished. No movement in the brush. No shapes fleeing across open ground. Nothing. Marcus watched the lead helicopter hover uncertainly over empty pasture. Through his binoculars, he could see the confusion in the shooter's body language. They'd come prepared for a turkey shoot and found themselves staring at vacant wilderness. His phone rang. Agent Chen. Marcus, we need to talk. I'm listening. Call them off. Call who off? Don't play games with me. We know you're controlling these animals. We have 60 federal personnel in the air right now, and they're authorized to shoot anything that moves. If you care about these creatures, you'll signal them to leave the area. Marcus took a slow sip of his coffee, still watching the helicopters through his binoculars. Agent Chen, you've got a fundamental misunderstanding of the situation. Which is what? I'm not controlling anything. I'm just not interfering with the natural order anymore. That's bullshit, and you know it. Agent, let me ask you something. When you were a little girl, did your grandmother ever tell you stories about wolves? What? Stories about how wolves know things, how they can sense intention, read character, understand who's a threat and who isn't, how they remember kindness and repay it, remember cruelty and settle accounts. Static crackled over the phone connection. In the background, Marcus could hear radio chatter and helicopter rotors. Marcus, we are prepared to level this entire area if necessary. These animals are a public safety threat, and you're harboring dangerous wildlife. No, Agent. I'm harboring family. The line went quiet except for the distant sound of aircraft. Engines. Marcus lowered his binoculars and looked at General, who was watching the helicopters with the patient attention of something waiting for the right moment. Agent Chen, you still there? I'm here. Your people in those helicopters, they're good men. They are professionals. That's not what I asked. Are they good men? Do they love their families? Do they go to church? Do they help their neighbors? Are they the kind of people who deserve to go home tonight? The static stretched longer this time. What are you asking me, Marcus? I'm asking if you want to call this off before it's too late. Too late for what? Marcus watched the lead helicopter descend toward his southern fence line, the one that bordered Kevin Paulson's property, the area where the old drainage canal created a natural funnel between two hills. Perfect terrain for an ambush, if you knew the ground well enough. General's been watching federal helicopters for 3 days now, Marcus said into the phone. Learning their patterns, sound signatures, flight characteristics. You think a boar with that much scar tissue got to be 400 pounds by being stupid? Animals don't plan military operations. Agent, these animals have been fighting for territory since before your government existed. They know strategy better than your tactical manuals. The first explosion echoed across the ranch like thunder. Not gunfire, something bigger. Through his binoculars, Marcus watched the lead helicopter shudder and spin, its tail rotor destroyed by something that had been launched from the drainage canal with devastating accuracy. Jesus Christ. Chen's voice crackled through the phone. Marcus, what the hell? The aircraft auto-rotated into Paulson's pasture, its crew scrambling clear as black smoke poured from the engine compartment. The second helicopter immediately climbed to a safer altitude, but Marcus could see shapes moving through the brush below it. Large shapes. Fast shapes. Coordinated shapes. Agent Chen, you need to call them off. Now. How? How are they doing this? Marcus lowered the binoculars and looked at General, who was watching the aerial battle with what looked almost like professional interest. 40 years I've been walking this land with them, teaching them which humans were threats and which weren't, showing them how to read vehicles, aircraft, weapons, training them to understand the difference between hunters and predators. The second helicopter was spinning now, its pilot fighting for control as something struck the landing gear. Marcus couldn't see the projectiles, stones, probably, or pieces of metal debris launched with frightening accuracy from concealed positions. They're not random animals, Agent. They're a family that's been learning from each other for generations. And I just taught them that federal agents are enemy combatants. Marcus, people are going to die. Then you better get them out of my family's territory. The third helicopter was already retreating, climbing fast toward the eastern horizon. Below it, Marcus could see his partners emerging from cover. Dozens of them, moving with military precision across terrain they defended for decades. General grunted once and trotted down the porch steps, heading toward the smoke column rising from Paulson's pasture. Not to attack the downed crew, Marcus could see federal personnel being evacuated by ground vehicles that had raced in from the road. The boar was heading toward something else, something that glinted in the morning sunlight near the wreckage. Weapons, high-powered rifles with tactical scopes, equipment that hadn't made it onto the evacuation vehicles. Agent Chen, Marcus said into the phone, your people just armed my security team. The line went dead. In the distance, sirens wailed as emergency vehicles converged on the crash site. But Marcus knew this was just the beginning. Washington would send more helicopters, more agents, more federal authority. And General was already teaching the younger boar how to operate a rifle scope. The war for Marcus Whitmore's ranch had officially begun, and the federal government was losing. 3 days after the helicopter incident, the media descended on Brazos County like locusts. CNN, Fox News, NBC, every major network had satellite trucks parked along Farm Road 158, their cameras trained on the ranch that had become the most dangerous piece of real estate in America. Marcus watched the circus from his kitchen window, while General maintained his post on the front porch. The massive boar had become something of a celebrity, his scarred profile appearing on news broadcasts across the nation under headlines like, Texas ranchers ARMY and when animals attack back. But Marcus knew the media attention was just theater. The real action was happening in Washington, where Deputy Assistant Director Martinez was facing congressional hearings about how federal wildlife management had resulted in what Senator Patricia Williams of Texas called the most humiliating defeat in ATF history. His phone rang. Agent Chen, as he'd expected. "Marcus, we need to end this." "I'm listening." "Washington's prepared to make a deal. Full dismissal of all federal charges. Recognition of your property rights. Permanent protection of the aquifer under private conservation easement." Marcus took a slow sip of his morning coffee. In exchange for what? Safe passage for federal personnel to remove the weapons that were acquired during the helicopter incident. Through the window, Marcus could see General's ears prick up at something only he could hear. In the distance, beyond the media circus, dust clouds marked the approach of more vehicles. Government plates, probably, though these looked different. Smaller. Less official. "Agent Chen, those weapons aren't on my property anymore." "Where are they?" "That's between me and my partners." Silence on the line, then, "Marcus, I've got orders to bring in military contractors if necessary. Private security firms with experience in unusual situations." "You mean mercenaries?" "I mean professionals who specialize in problems that conventional law enforcement can't handle." Marcus set down his coffee mug and walked to the front door. General looked up at him with eyes that held 40 years of shared understanding. Beyond the porch, movement in the oak line suggested their conversation was being monitored by interested parties with excellent hearing. "Agent, let me tell you what's really happening here." "I'm listening." This was never about firearms violations. This was never about wildlife management. This was about the federal government deciding that a private citizen had something they wanted, and using whatever legal pretext necessary to take it. "Marcus, and now you've discovered that some things can't be taken. Some partnerships run deeper than law. Some families fight back." The approaching vehicles were close enough now that Marcus could make out details. 3 SUVs, government plates, but these weren't law enforcement. The men getting out wore civilian clothes and moved with the casual alertness of professional soldiers, private contractors, just as Chen had warned. But as the mercenaries approached his gate, something remarkable happened. The media crews, who had been maintaining a respectful distance from the ranch, suddenly surged forward. Cameras rolling, reporters shouting questions, the entire circus of modern journalism creating a barrier between the contractors and Marcus's property. "Agent Chen, you seeing this?" "Seeing what?" "Your mercenaries just ran into the First Amendment." On live television, the lead contractor was trying to explain to a CNN reporter why private military personnel were necessary to resolve a wildlife situation on a Texas ranch. The optics were devastating. Armed men in tactical gear facing off against 60 Minutes cameras while a massive boar watched from a front porch like the world's most photogenic guard dog. Marcus's phone buzzed with an incoming text from a number he didn't recognize. "Mr. Whitmore, this is Senator Williams' office. The senator would like to speak with you at your earliest convenience." Another text, different number. "Marcus, this is Governor Abbott's chief of staff. Texas stands with property owners defending their constitutional rights." A third text, "Mr. Whitmore, Andrea Mitchell, NBC News. Would you be available for an interview this afternoon?" General grunted and stood up, his massive frame casting a shadow across the porch. In the oak line, Marcus could see other shapes stirring. Not the random movement of grazing animals, but the purposeful positioning of a security detail that understood media strategy as well as military tactics. "Agent Chen, I think our conversation just became irrelevant." "What do you mean?" "I mean your bosses in Washington just learned the difference between federal authority and public opinion." On the main road, the private contractors were retreating. To their vehicles, their mission compromised by the unblinking eye of national television. No mercenary wanted to be filmed shooting wild animals on a ranch owned by a Vietnam veteran defending his constitutional rights. Marcus walked out onto the porch and stood beside General. Across the media circus, dozens of cameras swung toward them. He could see reporters adjusting their positions, producers barking instructions into headsets, satellite trucks extending their transmission arrays. His phone rang again. "Agent Chen. Marcus, this isn't over." "Yes, it is. Washington doesn't give up this easily." Marcus looked down at General, who was watching the media spectacle with what looked almost like amusement. Agent, Washington just discovered that some wars can't be won with paperwork and government authority. Some fights require something your bosses will never understand. Which is what? The loyalty of creatures who remember kindness and repay it. The partnership of neighbors who've earned each other's trust. The support of people who still believe that a man's home is his castle, and his family, whatever form that family takes, is worth fighting for. As if summoned by his words, movement rippled through the oak line. Not just boar now, but other creatures. Deer, coyotes, even a red-tailed hawk that settled onto the porch railing like a feathered sentry. The ranch that had been under siege for weeks was revealing its true nature. Not a piece of contested real estate, but a sanctuary that had earned the protection of everything that lived on it. Agent Chen's voice was quiet when she spoke again. The federal government doesn't negotiate with terrorists, Marcus. Agent, take a look at your television coverage tonight. Then explain to your bosses in Washington which one of us looks like the terrorist. Marcus ended the call and slipped the phone into his pocket. Below him, General settled back onto the porch with the satisfaction of a job well done. In the distance, the private contractors' SUVs were disappearing down Farm Road 158, their retreat. Broadcast live to a nation that was discovering what happened when federal authority met Texas' stubbornness and 40 years of accumulated loyalty. The sun was setting over the Brazos County hills, painting the sky the color of old blood and new hope. Marcus Whitmore's ranch was safe. His family, all 4 legs and 2 legs and feathered wings of it, was safe. And in Washington, federal officials were learning that some partnerships couldn't be broken by warrants, couldn't be intimidated by helicopters, and couldn't be purchased by eminent domain proceedings. They had taken his rifle, but they had given him something far more powerful, the undivided attention of the American people, and the unshakable loyalty of creatures who understood that family meant everything, and family fights back. The war was over. Marcus Whitmore had won without firing a shot.